Hello, everyone, and welcome to this free training session from Infosec Institute, Generative AI for Leaders, Securely Transform Your Organization's Potential. My name is Jeff Peters, and I'm the Director of Brand and Content Marketing here at Infosec. We have a great hour about using AI planned for today, so let's jump right in and meet our speaker. Very excited to have Keatron Evans back with us for another AI session. Keatron is at the forefront of AI-driven cybersecurity innovation, so he is the perfect person to lead today's discussion. He is the VP of Portfolio Product and AI Strategy here at Infosec, where he leads cutting-edge solutions that are redefining cybersecurity education and training. He has over 20 years of experience, so he brings a unique blend of expertise, including being an AWS-certified generative AI subject matter expert, cybersecurity expert, author of Chained Exploits, Advanced Hacking Attacks from Start to Finish, and he's also a founding member of an AI company that developed offensive security tools for U.S. intelligence organizations. All right, welcome, Keatron. Excited to have you here.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate that.
Yeah, so before we dive into the meat of the discussion, just want to set some expectations for today. I provide a little context on this training. We actually developed this generative AI for leaders training for some of our enterprise clients. Here at Infosec, we've been helping upskill and certify cybersecurity pros for more than 2 decades. So obviously, some of them also came to us for helping with, implementing generative AI, and as that's been all over the news the past few years. So Keatron helped develop that initial training, and we've since turned that into a 2-day boot camp that anyone can enroll in to help quickly get busy leaders up to speed on AI. So this is going to be the condensed version of that. Got less than an hour. So obviously not going to cover everything that you get to in that boot camp, but we do hope to provide a great overview and answer as many questions as we can. And lastly, we do have a related content section where we have some free resources. This is part of our AI training series. We will be doing more free AI-focused trainings throughout the year. We recently did one with a hacking workshop with the interactive lab where Keatron walked through using ChatGPT to hack into a system, detect an attack. So you can check that out, enroll in that if you want. It's totally free. And then lastly, we do have a number of AI courses on learning paths in our Infosec Skills Library. So if you download that emerging trends and skills infographic, you can learn more about the latest certs, cloud certs, and all the AI stuff that we have available. So with that, let's dive into it. Keatron, I guess I'll throw it to you. Can you maybe talk a little bit about, how you first got involved in generative AI?
Yeah, so I was asked by an organization probably about 4.5 years ago to author a white paper on how machine learning and AI is transforming cybersecurity. And part of the charge for that paper was to go out and interview like machine learning experts and some other people that had been doing this for a really long time. So I talked to a couple of professors at some Ivy League universities and stuff like that, and some practitioners at some organizations. And on that project, I was talking to people, and one of them mentioned something about this new revolution of different ways of utilizing AI to where, we're experimenting with ways to generate net new content and net new things, not just reorganize things that we already have access to. And that was my first introduction to it. I didn't put it in that white paper because it wasn't related yet to the topic, but it was my first introduction. And from there, I kind of got really interested in it, and just, as I do with things, like I'm not good at a lot of things, but the things that I'm really interested in, those few things, I'll pick those things and go very, very deep into them. And that's what I did starting from 4 years ago up to about now. So traditional AI, and this is a lot of what my first white paper was around, really just is involved in taking large amounts of information and data and being able to recognize patterns, pull insights, do predictive analysis and things like that based on that data. What has really became popularized and kind of had a new birth is, I guess, really about 10 to 12 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago, we started hearing these statistics of like, we generate so much data in just our daily internet usage and how we consume information and how we use the internet every day, that we're only technically capable of consuming or using like 1% of that information, right? In other words, even if we had the marketing and the analytics know-how, the ability to process all that data and get insights from it, we just didn't have it. Enter into the modern era of machine learning. This is where machine learning kind of got a new birth. And as a result of that, people started working on using machine learning to take all of that data from the internet and other types of metadata and being able to get insights from it that we never had before. Because another interesting thing was starting to happen around that same time, and that was the maturity of cloud services and rapid elasticity as far as how you can go out and get resources that you need up to supercomputer types of resources for very short amounts of time and only pay for that time. So once cloud matured to that point, it suddenly became more feasible to generate the right models, to use the right algorithms in the right combination, because we could go ahead and pay for a lot of supercomputer compute power just long enough to prove out that this concept worked and then shut it down and we're not paying for that. So I always like to pair with that, when I'm explaining this to people, that like we had to get to a place technologically, compute and storage wise, to where that became affordable enough for enough people to have access to that compute power for what we know as traditional AI even to become a thing. And that was kind of the catalyst that like made that possible. Now, with generative AI, the primary difference is with generative AI, we're now able to create new things in some cases. In other words, not only can we take this data and run it through models and get insights, we can actually generate new things. And when I say new things, like when you think about Netflix and how we use that to generate recommendations for what you watch, they use machine learning and AI for that. You're still not creating anything new. You're taking a database of content that's already there and you're organizing it in a way that is suitable to how someone wants to view it. So that's not creating something new. But we can create new books, we can create new works of art, we can create new art, we can create, we've even been experimenting internally. We're taking my voice, taking me talking about generative AI or cybersecurity, and converting that into a version of me that synthetically sounds like me, has my emotions, has my voice, has my just my general demeanor of how I speak in 50 different languages, right? That is something that's net new. And I would even say it's something that would be impossible for me to generate without AI, at least in a reasonable amount of time, because I'd have to go and master all 50 of those languages, because the tools that we're experimenting with keeps the right nuances of those languages in and all of that. So we're entering an era with generative AI to where we can create net new content, some of it of which we've just not even been able to create before. So it's not just that we can do things faster and automate things and write better. We can create new things that it took a lot more time and effort to create than it does now.
Yeah, we have some data here then on AI adoption. So we pulled this from the source there is the McKinsey Global Surveys on the State of AI, and they've been surveying people for a few years on AI. And so just to quickly understand this chart on the right here, that dark blue bar on the bottom is data from the second half from July of 2024. And then above that is from the first half of 2024. So according to this survey of different professionals, 78% of organizations are using AI for at least one business application as of July 2024. And 71% are specifically using generative AI. So I think it's interesting, talking about traditional AI. If you look at the one or more business functions, even going back a couple of years, more than half of organizations have been using AI. But when you start looking at 3 or more business functions, 4 or more business functions, 5 or more, 2023, only 16% of organizations were using it for 3 business functions. Then it got to a quarter. That was 45%. I'm assuming when they survey again, more than half of organizations are going to be using AI for at least 3 business functions now. So, I'm just curious, Keatron, is that kind of aligned with what you're seeing in terms of AI adoption at different organizations you work with?
It is aligned, and there's some good and bad to that, right? Like the good is a lot of organizations are doing it the thing that I'm seeing that's a little concerning is some are jumping into it at a very, very fast rate, going all in without completely understanding the technology and completely getting a full, um, knowledge, I would say, upskilling of the technologies and how they work. So it's great that it's happening, but one of the things that I would caution, and keep in mind, I'm a advocate. Like, I want everybody in every company to have access and utilize this stuff in a way that's beneficial. But I think there's a certain level of responsibility that you have to adopt it in a way that, we still have to manage risk, right? As leaders, a big part of what we do is, we look at where we need to go, we create visions, and then we march towards that. But somewhere in our organization, there's people that have to manage the risk that we open up to by taking that step. AI, specifically generative AI, introduces, both to me in the history of my life, the biggest opportunities for advancement for organizations, while also introducing the biggest risk for organizations as far as how this goes about and what ends up happening. So I think with those grandiose, realities there, we have to have a little bit extra care and caution in making sure that we go forward with an actual strategy and we have risk management embedded in and wrapped around how we bring AI into our organizations.
Awesome. I think we're going to spend a little bit of time now talking about some more of the different applications of generative AI, and then we'll switch over to talking about some of the ethical, security, and compliance concerns. Um, Definitely encourage, especially for this section, I would love to hear for those who are, implementing AI at their organizations, what are your use cases, or if you have specific questions that you'd like Keatron to answer. Um, but this slide here goes back to that McKinsey report. The previous slide we talked about, the 3 or more business functions. Well, these are the 11 business functions on the left there. So you can see marketing and sales is leading the way with AI adoption at organizations, followed by product and service development, IT, service operations, knowledge management. So just a little bit of insight there. And then on the next slide here, a little bit of a text-heavy slide, but we have just some different example AI use cases. So I think we can pause on this slide just for a minute. Like I said, if you have anything, at your own organization, feel free to drop it in the QA and we can talk about that. But yeah, curious, Keatron, I know you talked about, translations and things like that. Any interesting or common use cases that you're seeing at different organizations or within your own team?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks are taking advantage of things like, copywriting and printing stuff and generating content, whether that be like professional content for learning, or it's just content to go on a website, or even, personal, um, influencers are starting to lean into AI. I know me personally, I'm playing with and have learned how to use different tools to automate things like social media postings, right? It's the tools that we've put together knows how to look at the cybersecurity market, bring the topics back to me that I care about, have me parse those topics. I give like some little commentary about the topics. Here's my brain dump of what I think. And then it's able to take that and make that into social media posts and post those at an interval for me without me having to manually do it. So this is a way for me to spend like 20 minutes a day on social media, whereas I used to have to spend like 2 or 3 hours a day, and still do my full-time job while still being able to educate and lead the followers that I've accumulated over the years. So I think though you're going to see more and more of that type of novel use. But on the business side, things, we're getting ready for some rapid changes. And as much as people, like, I'm just going to be candid here because there may be, like some not popular things that I'm about to say. But like what I've noticed is a lot of organizations and people will look at these capabilities and say things like, well, it's going to be years before it gets to where it can do it well enough for it to be acceptable. And we keep learning these lessons over and over. I can remember when Uber, for example, first became a thing, like for a few months in the beginning, it was like, oh, well, there was a person that took an Uber and they got murdered by the Uber driver. The Uber driver kill this person. There are all of these horror stories of things that happen, basically saying it like, yeah, this is not going to go anywhere. And then here we are a few years later, and we don't even think about cabs. When I land at the airport and I need to get to my hotel without getting a rental car, or I need to go somewhere without a rental car, a cab is like the last thing that comes to my mind. It's that app that's on my phone. And even though cab companies have now caught on and they have those apps as well, it's just too late. They're behind, like nobody thinks of them first. I think we have to be careful, especially as leaders, when we draw lines in the sand as far as like what AI can and can't do. I always say that, like, if you start a conversation with, well, AI can't do this, you're probably walking on treacherous ground there, because what we can prove AI can and can't do is changing not daily, but hourly. And I'll say that again, it's changing hourly. Jobs that we thought a year ago that would not be suitable for AI, as AI innovations and implementations evolve, as our control of how we understand the algorithms and how we can put those algorithms together and get to results that we didn't get to before, as that evolves, more and more things are going to become AI enabled. And I almost see it as like, you have to think of it as like the internet, for example, is like a layer now of just how we live. I think I heard somebody say this, but the AI is going to become kind of the same thing. It's going to be a layer that significantly moves forward almost everything that we do in life now manually, as far as like, operations and creating stuff and sharing stuff and communicating with people and all those things. So we have to be prepared for that, and we have to see that vision and kind of position ourselves in the best place to strategically walk into that, because ignoring it or trying to deny that it's going to happen is kind of a setup for disaster, especially for leaders.
Yeah, we have a question from Jordan. He's asking about for organization using AI for marketing and sales. With AI becoming more recognizable to the general public, are they noticing that domain reputation being impacted negatively by using it for automated messaging? Yeah, I could, maybe just throw some initial thoughts there. I don't know if anyone's read Ethan Mollick's book, but he has a book called Co-Intelligence. He's a professor at Wharton, and he's actually done some interesting research on AI having more empathy and more patience than the average human for like customer service use cases. He says there's still a lot of research to do, but one study actually found that people preferred interacting with the AI when it came to like customer service requests via email, because it could be instantaneous. It didn't have all the jargon. Just endlessly empathetic. So I thought that was an interesting use case for me, because it's kind of the flip side of what I would think AI would be. You think humans are going to be more empathetic, but in this case, AI is able to imitate that. So I thought that was interesting. I don't know if you have anything to add about marketing or sales, Keatron.
Yeah, I mean, that point, I've like tested that theory out a good bit. Like, so for example, I gave Claude the most abstract, question I could think of, to where there's hardly a best way to do something, but I asked it to give me that. And no matter how many times I said, that's not what I'm looking for, try again. That's not what I'm looking for, try again. That's not really clear, try again. It never stopped giving me different alternatives of output. And it never got mad at me for asking the same thing over and over and over again. If I get, on average, if I'm talking to a real human and it's like at the end of the day and they've dealt with 100 calls already, and I'm, just being difficult and asking the same question over and over and over again, the response and the effort that I'm generally going to get from that person is going to be affected by the fact that it's the end of the day, they've worked a lot of hours already, and I'm just quite frankly being annoying with how I'm interacting with them. Now, mind you, there are some professionals that are very good at managing that type of thing, but let's just be honest. In general, we've all experienced where we caught that person at the end of the day where they've had a bad day, and that shows up in our interactions with them and how they respond to us. The thing is with AI, you just don't get that. That's something that's not there. So I could see the sentiment for those people that responded to that survey that said that like they actually like interacting with the AI more because you don't have to deal with the personality and the drama. And I know that's a sword that cuts two ways because in some cases the personality is what you need to make for example, the customer service experience um, worthy. Because a lot of times, like the customer service part of the job is to just make the caller feel better and coach them through like whatever challenge it is they're dealing with. So I mean, I think there's arguments to both sides of that, but like, look, let's just be real. Like I had like for one of my companies, I had a AI person, like an AI bot in AWS, answering every call that came through, fielding that call, talking to the person, handing that call off to the right person. This was like in 2017, right? So, and it did a great job then, and nobody knew the difference. Imagine how much that technology has progressed now in 2025, which is 8 years later. So I think it's something that while we can make the argument that people are always better, like, you know, Five Guys is better than McDonald's, arguably, right? But if I can get to five McDonald's before in 5 minutes and it takes me an hour to get to Five Guys, a lot of times I'm going to pick that convenience. So these are the things that we have to accept as reality.
Yeah, and we're going to get to some of the other security concerns in a minute, but just one news story I saw yesterday that I shared with the team was a new hire at an organization, the CEO called her and had a 20-minute conversation with her, said a bunch of inappropriate stuff. So then she raised the case with HR. Turns out it was just a deepfake. The CEO that she was talking with the whole time thought it was a real person. So yeah, there's definitely some negatives to it. But the last thing I think we can have here, and then we'll move on, is Timothy's asking about he doesn't see cybersecurity here specifically mentioned as one of these 11 different buckets. I'm sure, yeah, as he says, it probably falls into IT, but also cybersecurity probably falls across all the departments when it comes to AI. If you're using AI in marketing, there's cybersecurity concerns as well, potentially.
Yeah, it's just kind of wrapped up in IT, but like, me being a cybersecurity leader for a lot of years and being an evangelist in that space still now, I can tell you, like, again, the first white paper I wrote on AI was, AI as it relates to cybersecurity. And one of the differences, Jordan, is like with AI and cybersecurity, there are so many cybersecurity products that have the AI baked into it. So, for example, if you take the top SIM operators like Splunk and Exabeam and Logarithm and all of those, right? Like all those SIM operators have key components that are driven by AI now. Okay, if you take the top endpoint security solutions, like your CrowdStrikes or your Mandiants or whatever product it is you choose, like they mostly all have AI components that drive how it does a lot of the correlation and identification of malicious things that it does. And if you look at some of the ones that are on the cutting edge, a lot of them even use generative AI to do that mapping a lot more effectively and with a lot lower cost. Because doing a lot of that mapping using traditional AI the way we were doing it before Gen AI is a lot more costly than doing that same mapping with generative AI, because of the fact that we can generate new things from it. So I think that it's cybersecurity is one area of IT that's probably ahead of most other areas when it comes to adopting and bringing AI into the technology. And this is in part driven by the threat actors, the bad guys, because some of the first research I did on AI and cybersecurity had to do with how the threat actors were using AI to more quickly write zero-day exploits, right? If they're fuzzing an application and looking for buffer overflow opportunities, they're looking for ROP chain vulnerabilities in software. It's a lot easier to do that using AI and get to that certain point in memory to where there's a potential to overwrite some protected memory space or something. It's a lot faster and easier to do that using AI than it is the way that we traditionally did it, right? So finding vulnerabilities in software is something that can be rapidly accelerated using AI in the right way. Also finding vulnerabilities, on networks, finding what ports are opening and deciphering that and turning it into something that's novel. I do a demo in a previous webinar. What I think it was the pen testing and AI webinar that we did a few months ago, where I'll take like an output from Nmap and from Netstat, and as a novice say, "Hey Claude" or "Hey ChatGPT, tell me what's happening here and tell me if there's anything that I need to be concerned about." And sure enough, it's able to find it like, well, yeah, you've got this socket open, and that the traffic on that is generally, that traffic looks like it's usually associated with a specific piece of malware or ransomware, right? Like it's able to decipher all those things, without me having the expertise, if I didn't have it, to be able to come to that conclusion. So I think that, I think it's now just assumed that like in cybersecurity, it's one of the areas that's kind of in the forefront of bringing AI along for the ride as we evolve what cybersecurity means.
All right, now let's jump into some of the ethics and security and compliance issues. We already started talking a little bit about them. Yeah, as I was putting together this presentation, if you're not sure who Sam Altman is, he's the CEO of OpenAI, he's all over the news recently. But I remember seeing a quote about him about similar to this. I was trying to find it, and I used Claude and ChatGPT and Gemini. I've been playing around with them, so help them find this quote. And he says AI is going to be one of the greatest wealth creating technology of our time, but we need to use it in the right way. Every company is going to be an AI company, not because they'll make AI, but because AI will be such a competitive advantage. So I was all excited because I found the quote that I knew I had heard a while back. So I put it in this slide. But to go back to that question from Timothy, like this is not an actual quote from Sam. It was made up by Claude. I think directionally it's correct. I took 6 or 7 different things he said and put it into a very convincing quote. But that would go back to like the hallucinations and misinformation there. So for sure, as a marketing team, yeah, we're concerned about, we got 20 years of trust built up in the space of helping train and educate people. We don't want to be, putting out fabricated stuff. So that's one of the things we think about a lot as a team as we're starting to use some of this AI stuff. But yeah, is there any other ethical stuff you want to highlight here, Keatron?
Yeah, I mean, so look, like people, right? Like there's always going to be the opportunity for people to take advantage of things and use it to defraud other people and other businesses. Like that's just a reality. Like AI is not immune to that, right? So, when you look at some of the things, like part of the stuff that I worked on, when I was working on like the AWS certifications, helping them to create that and doing some of the workforce development stuff around AI, bias and fairness always came up. And, part of that is like when you look at any type of mathematical model or AI model, like the training data, like if they're ingesting training data that has bias already in it, then naturally there's going to be bias coming out of what that data generates, right? Now, this risk unfair or discriminatory outputs, and this is a challenge that we've had over time. But I believe that AI also gives us the most likely ability, like it gives us the ability to where we can eventually get past that if we utilize it properly, right? Since we know the training data, we can account for that by introducing new training data that either cancels out, minimizes, or eliminates that bias, right? Or we could start with training data. We can choose to start with training data that doesn't have that bias in it. It has the right amount of diversity in the training data. And now we can base, our decisions off true outcome. So that's one thing. Hallucinations and misinformation, sometimes it produces incorrect or fabricated information. This is the thing with trying to make a machine or a piece of code intelligent, is the definition of being intelligent and giving an output is inherently more important than being right. Right? So what happens in an effort to close that loop, because it is code. So we're talking still loops here, to close that loop and finish that operation. Sometimes the information that comes out, the quality of it is sacrificed in an effort to just close that loop and get you out that information. So hallucinations and things like that, these are things that can be like, we have mitigation strategies and mitigation techniques for that. Like, I don't want to get into the math or get into, maybe we'll do another technical webinar at some point, Jeff, to where like I pull up some of these models and show how we can, fine tune and get rid of some of these things. But there's also intellectual property concerns like AI generated content. You may unknowingly generate an image that you think is brand new, because we've been saying net new, and it turns out that that image was inspired by somebody else's original work, whereas they're not getting any compensation whatsoever for that net new work that you've generated that you're getting compensated for. That's not exactly fair. Um, some things that have been done around that, like, some organizations just have a collection of authors' work, and they pay the authors like a royalty fee to generate new content from that author's content. And that way they are getting some type of compensation for it. If you look at like Adobe and all of the big vendors that you buy stock photography from, if you look at their website, they'll have these tags that say, look, this is generated from AI. And they actually now have a statement on there to tell you like how they're working with authors to do this in a ethical and fair way. And then also transparency. Like, it's often unclear how AI arrived at a result, making accountability and trust challenging. One of the things that Jeff and Casey used to do a lot of for me is I would write, because I write a lot of articles and do a lot of thought leadership for Infosec. And one thing that used to happen a lot is I would write an article and Jeff and Casey would do quite a bit of wordsmithing, editing, and that type of thing. Before they knew about generative AI, before it became mainstream, like I started using it, I would write things and then I would use AI for grammar correction and punctuation, just, the stuff that like my brain doesn't have time to think about in a way that someone that's got a degree in English would, for example, right? So Jeff noticed one time, he's like, yeah, I don't know, Keatron, the last two articles you gave me, like I've had like one sentence structure recommendation that I had to like stretch for. It was just, the conversation was something like that, and I revealed to him like, well, yeah, I'm using AI to do all the grammar check and stuff like that before it goes out. And even with that, like one of the things I noticed is like, if you're not careful, you lose your voice in it, right? Which is why I don't use it as much, because like it'll correct things, it'll make it sound so much better from a grammar and structure standpoint, but it doesn't sound like you anymore. And I happen to understand the value of my unique voice and the way that I look at things. So I kind of reel back on it a good bit because of that. But again, there's improvements for that.
All right, now let's jump into some of the security considerations. Obviously, being, primarily a cybersecurity education and training company, I'm sure, we've given us a lot of thought, and I know within the Infosec Skills platform, we have a number of different learning paths on AI security. But yeah, anything you're most concerned about or want to highlight here?
Yeah, so this ties to some of the questions that I see, like, one from, from Ferric asking about what measures should you take to prevent unauthorized access when deploying AI-based knowledge retrieval systems. Well, I mean, so one is like you have to have proper security around this technology, right? And this goes with like any technology that you're using. So having good accounting, like who's using it, when are they using it, when are they able to use it, what type of data are they going to have to input into this tool to use it, what type of data is coming out of the tool, when that data comes out, what happens to that data. So like it really helps to think of it, Ferric, starting from a data privacy standpoint, like what data goes into the system, where does it come from, right? How is it being utilized? Is it being stored anywhere? Is the model keeping copies of it? Is the application that's pulling from the model keeping copies of it? Is it being cached somewhere? The output, where are we putting that? How are we using it? Is it something we're selling? Is it output that we're copywriting? All of those answers will dictate what your policy is around how you manage and policy your AI, right? If you don't answer all those questions that I just asked, you can't really build good policy and procedure around it. You gotta know the path from, like, what data are we using to use this AI tool? Where is it coming from? Where is it going? How's it being used? How's the model using it? How's the tool that pulls from the model? How's it using it? And then when it comes out, how's it coming out to us? Where is it going? Who's distributing it? What types of, control do we have around that? Like, ask those questions. That will be the foundation of how you start to build your policy, right? Now, expanded attack surface, like, yes, there's new APIs and things that attackers can target. Like, we do a lot of research over here on, exploiting models, doing injections, just making models do things that they're not designed to do. I mean, that's kind of the mantra of hacking, right? It's like you look at a piece of code or an application and you figure out what it's supposed to do, and then your whole goal in life is to make it do things it's not supposed to do. That's essentially how hacking was born. It's no different with AI, right? So, yes, there are AI-powered threats. Phishing and things like that have gotten so much better. Jeff mentioned the deepfake instance. Like, I've worked on two cases, like response cases, where deepfakes caused some people to send a lot of money to places it wasn't supposed to go. Two, this is me personally. I worked on two cases personally like that, to where I was the expert that had to come in and help. So if I'm one person and I've had two cases like that, you know that this thing is rampant out there. There's been a few public, like, cases like that got very public knowledge and very publicly covered. But I promise you, there's so many more of these happening that's not getting the media coverage because it's just downright embarrassing, one. And for the two cases that I worked on, I absolutely had to sign a bunch of stuff that said I'd never mention anything about who these folks were or what these organizations were that were involved in this, right? So, like, there's an embarrassment piece to it, but there's also an awareness piece that we have responsibility to educate people on.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that because obviously, we are also a security awareness training company and human risk management company. We have products for that to help train the average person. So this is kind of, I guess, the $1 million question. I'll put you on the spot, but it seems like the direction's gone from tell everyone not to click on links, don't trust, your text messages, all the spam, and now it feels like it's going towards, don't trust video, don't trust audio. So yeah, any advice for people that are involved, I guess, on the more security awareness side with, the way AI is evolving some of these more social engineering type attacks?
Yeah, like, just like, if you're getting, I mean, if it's certain things, right? Like, go and visit this website and look at this video. Like, if you're getting an instruction to do that, you just have to treat it like you would your normal phishing, hygiene, and things like that. But stuff like doing wire transfers or doing other things that are big and grandiose, you really have to develop a habit within yourself to where you're now double checking with that individual or that authority that's asking you to do that thing. Like, wiring $5 million to a startup company, without having any communication with an executive other than a Zoom call or a Teams call. If that's not weird, it should be weird, right? So you have to reinvent how you do these things. Like, a lot of these cases, the two that I've worked on, it was a similar thing to that, to where, like, these financial things were authorized with just very light touch, Teams or Zoom or some other communications via email and stuff like that. You have to kind of reconfigure how you do that. Like, if you're on a Zoom call and someone tells me to wire $5 million somewhere, I'm probably going to follow up with an actual phone call. There's going to be something that I do to spend an extra 2 minutes to verify that, like, this is really what you want me to do. We have to kind of rethink that. Now, there's technologies coming out. Some of them are very promising that will be able to detect a lot of the deep fake stuff. But, like, look, it's just going to be a cat and mouse game. Like, once we develop good, solid technology to detect it, there's going to be, bypasses. People are going to innovate new attacks to get around it. So we have to really just rethink how we go about doing these very big things like that.
Yeah, we have another slide here. This is those same 11 business units, just some different, we had the previous slide talked about AI, generative AI use cases for each sort of business application. This just highlights, some potential security concerns to consider. It's obviously not going to cover everything on the slide, but you can download the slide deck and refer to it in the future if you would like. Anything else you want to mention about security before we move on to compliance?
No, I think we kind of jumped ahead on some of this, so we can
Yeah.
move past this one.
Yeah. So then the last section here is compliance. That's another big piece. Yeah, throw it back to you, Keatron.
Yeah, so a lot of research going into these areas, especially with compliance and making sure that you meet these things. Like it's a lot easier to take for example, a Terraform configuration file that goes out and builds all of your cloud environment, right? Like just for those that aren't cloud savvy, like like there's a technology called Terraform that instead of you going into the cloud and building each individual virtual machine or container or network or virtual private cloud, you can build that via scripting using something called Terraform. Or if you're using AWS, you can use something called Cloud Formation, which is basically automating building out an entire organization in the cloud without you manually having to do that like we would on a premise or a real environment, right? So being able to take your entire organizational build in Terraform or Cloud Formation or whatever, running that through something like Claude and saying, reconfigure this to make sure that everything that we're building is HIPAA, GDPR, and PCI compliant is a powerful, powerful thing. Now, yes, you still have to vet the results of that to make sure that what you're getting in your build out meets those compliance things, but it definitely goes a lot farther than having to try to do that and figure it out manually. A lot of the busy work that goes into compliance and all of these things, Gen AI is basically a gateway to keep us from having to do some of those things. Now, your busy work is still going to be vetting out what you get on the other side, but a lot of that upfront busy work is going to slowly dissipate as we start to wrap Gen AI into these motions of compliance and legal obligations.
All right, let's wrap up here then with the next steps. For people who actually want to implement Gen AI. Yeah, I know this. I've heard you say this a few times, Keatron, and I've taken it to heart. Leaders must get close to this Gen AI technology. So you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, like it's like some of the most important lessons I've learned as a leader, and this is from people that like I look up to, that I consider to be mentors, like Jim Chilton and Darren Person and other folks like that in our organization. Like one of the things that I've learned over the years is like, part of your job as a leader is to be a visionary and to envision like where you're going and how to get there in a feasible way. And the thing with Gen AI, it's amazing to me how leaders are making very big decisions on to do Gen AI or not to do it and how to do it without really understanding how the technology actually works. Because here's the thing, if you have the ability, like there's a there's a movie, like a James McAvoy movie that I liked from back in the day, and Angelina Jolie, called Wanted, right? It was where they were like assassins by blood, and like you had all of this adrenaline that you would build up that we treat as anxiety, but it really means like you're a natural born assassin. You have all these superhuman abilities. And one of the abilities they had was to be able to like curve bullets, right? Like they could shoot around corners, essentially. If you're planning to do battle, and make no mistake about it, like when it comes to Gen AI and cybersecurity, like we're constantly planning to do battle against, malicious threat actors. And there's capabilities that you don't even know exist, then you're not going to do a great job of building out that plan. So if you're trying to chart a generative AI policy and roadmap for your organization, but you have very limited understanding of the technology, you're going to have a hard time doing a good job of that. And look, it's like because some of the pushback I've got on this, Jeff, is I've had leaders say, well, you know what? I've got Gen AI people and IT and cyber experts that do this for me, right? But here's the problem. As a leader, you might have 25 buckets of information that you have to look into every day to make business decisions. Whereas most people in an organization is only looking at like 3 or 4 of those buckets at a time, including those people that you're saying can figure it out for you. You know, we got smart people that are technology people. They can figure the AI stuff out for us. No, they need you. They need you leaders to get closer to the technology because again, you're looking in 15 to 20 buckets of information and knowledge that they just don't, they're not privy to. So you can't, it's nearly impossible to have good, solid AI strategy without the direct input and not even just input, but the driving of that coming from the leader. And I would challenge you leaders to say you can't do a good job of that if you're not close enough to the technology. Well, what do I mean by close enough? If you know how to go into chat GPT and fix your email to make your email better, that's not close enough. That's because everybody can essentially do that. Do you need to go out and be able to write algorithms and fine tune models? Probably not. But if you can find the time to go learn how to do some of those basic things, like there's hands-on AI courses for leaders where you can absolutely learn how to the basics of what fine-tuning a model looks like. Like you actually go in and do that and see the difference in the results, right? I think you need to get to that level of understanding so that you have an idea of not where the technology is, but where it could potentially head. And if you can do that, that is part of what makes you the best leader. Because look at, none of us know all the answers. Like we don't. But the more informed you are and the more you understand the capabilities of the technology and the more you stay plugged in to know where it's headed, the better off you're going to be when making those types of decisions. All right?
Yeah, and I would just add, you don't have to be super technical. I wouldn't say I'm super close to the technology, but even, a relatively simple marketing guy like myself was able to take, the AWS Generative AI Practitioner Foundational exam and go in and, go into AWS and play around with some of those models and stuff that Keatron was talking about. So, yeah, it's definitely pretty easy to get started doing that if you got the interest. Yeah, so we do have a couple questions about tips for Gen AI implementation. Some people are asking, like, what's the best recommended software, apps, to get started, or, build organization charts, policies, things like that. So maybe we could just take a minute to talk about, people who want to take that next step, want to get started. I know personally over the past couple of months, I've played around a lot with, ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Claude. You can subscribe to most of those for just $20 a month, besides the free versions that are available. But yeah, anything people should do to get started and like actually start taking steps to get closer to the technology or start implementing stuff?
Yeah, I mean, look, like obviously we have like some good introduction stuff. We have like some learning paths and skills that are just for leaders to like understand like what you need to be focused on when it comes to Gen AI. But like look at the specific technologies. So look at Amazon's, look at Microsoft's, look at some of the free stuff that they have out there specifically for, how they're bringing people into their AI ecosystem and just understand, dig into it, like try to do the free hands-on stuff just so that you can see what it plays out as. Like I was in a room just last night, at a reception with, a bunch of leaders here in the DC area. And, the people like that had something to show, right? Like one CEO had his team to create a whole app to basically just ask him questions like via the app. and the AI would respond on his behalf based on every other response that they'd taken from his emails and other things that they fed it. And that person led a lot of conversations. That person was considered to be one of the leaders in AI amongst leaders in that room because they had something to show, and that means that they'd gotten closer to the technology. So I would say start by giving yourself a little project to do something like that, to show where you have, if not architected, given a directive of a use case to where it can actually help your organization. But to the question, the biggest barriers, like I think it's just allocating and prioritizing the time, I think is what the biggest barrier is. To me, that's what it seems like.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that I would add is if you're not sure what the use cases are, you can just simply ask the generative AI. It's really great at role playing. So if you say, hey, you are a generative AI expert helping specialize in this field, helping doing X, Y, and Z, give me some ideas. You can actually use the AI. That's what I use it for a lot on the marketing side to help generate ideas and things like that. We have only a couple minutes left, so if you have any other questions, throw them in. But did just want to mention, this, as we mentioned at the top, this originally came out for some enterprise training that we did for some of the organizations we work with. Now we've turned it into a 2-day boot camp. So if you want to get more, hands-on and dive a lot deeper into these topics, we do have a 2-day version for Generative AI for Leaders Bootcamp. And as Keatron mentioned, we do have a number of AI learning paths in our Infosec Skills on Demand platform, which comes with all of these boot camps. So, like as you can see on the screen here, you got ChatGPT for offensive security, some AI security essentials, machine learning for red team hackers. Keatron's some of the stuff that he's done in there, like that ethical hacking workshop that we did earlier this year. Anything you want to say about this, about our boot camps in general, or about this generative AI for leaders bootcamp, Keatron?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth people taking a look at. You can get in there for free, and just check it out. Like, take some of those ideas, go run with them. There was a question that I didn't get the answer that I saw, like asking about how would you create like organizational charts and things like that with AI. So Claude, ChatGPT, they can all do that. Like, you'd be surprised if you just go into Claude and say, like, my organizational chart consists of me, I'm the VP, and then like here's all the other team members. Here's what their responsibilities and roles are. Generate me a attractive org chart that highlights that. You'd be amazed at how the quality of a chart that it generates and spits out for you, right? So I would say just trying those tools, like that's one of the misconceptions is people think that you can only get text output from chatbots, but that's not true. Like, these things are constantly improving. So I would say go to your favorite chatbot, whether it be Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude, Anthropic, whatever, and just ask it some of those questions and look at what it generates out for you.
Yeah, definitely. So with that, we've only got a minute or two left, so we will wrap up. Appreciate you all for joining us today. If you'd like more information, please reach out at any time. Happy to answer your Gen AI questions or any questions you have about training for your team. As I mentioned, we'll be doing more AI sessions throughout the year, as well as topics on other cybersecurity training stuff. So anything that's on your mind, let us know. We might consider that for a future session. But with that, have a great rest of your day. Appreciate you taking the time, Keatron, and hope everyone has a wonderful week.
Thank you, Jeff.